Hi, this is Rick Levine with your mid-month update for September 2018. Today is September 18th, and it's a very powerful day, and there's lots of interesting things going on. I want to basically talk about a couple of things. Some of these things I've already covered in my monthly overview at the beginning of the month, but we're going to delve a little bit deeper today. In particular, we're going to look at today's square between Mars and Uranus and the impact that it seems to be having on national politics in the United States and probably on individual lives also. Then we will take a look at the full moon on the 24th and kind of finalize with moving toward the end of the month. It's obviously a very powerful and intense month with now with Mercury and Mars and Saturn all moving direct, Pluto turning direct at the end of the month. As it slows down for its station, it even gains more power than it normally has. But I want to start off talking about Mars and Uranus because they are the main characters of the day. So Mars, as we know, is the warrior planet. Mars is the planet of action. Mars is hot and angry. Mars, having been retrograde, it now moving direct, is covering the same territory in the sky that it already covered actually once moving forward in mid-May, and then when it turned retrograde, covering the same territory toward the middle end of July, beginning of August, and now covering the same territory for the third and final time. And the significant thing about this is that Uranus at early degrees of Taurus during this process is being squared by Mars as it moves through that point. So I want to start off with the dates involved and then replay some history and look at the events that are going on right now. Mars actually moved into Aquarius and squared Saturn, having just moved into Taurus, and that occurred back in May 16th on 2018. The retrograde occurred on August 1st, and then now the direct, the third and final direct, is exact on the 18th of September. So the deal is this, that when there is a direct retrograde direct over the same point, there's often resonances that are set up that continue playing on through. And I want to start off by looking at the Mars and the relationship between fiery, hot, angry, assertive, aggressive Mars and irrepressible Uranus. The lightning strikes, the information comes out whether or not you want it to. And I want to back up and look at last December 1st when Uranus was being opposed by Mars, Mars opposing Uranus on December 1st, and interestingly enough, it was that week on December 6th that Time magazine broke the persons of the year as the Me Too movement, and I should say the hashtag Me Too movement. And that in some ways is resonant to a larger scenario that we seem to be in the midst of and seem to be repeating events that happen when Mars and Uranus are in a harsh aspect. In fact, Mars made a square and a half, that's a 135-degree aspect, to Uranus on February 12th, 2018, and it was on the 11th that New York State actually filed a lawsuit against Weinstein that had exploded back earlier, back in late 2017, not only with Jupiter moving into Scorpio, but through the end of November and beginning of December. That's what prompted the Me Too cover of Time magazine when Mars opposed Uranus on December 1st. But bringing it up closer to now, on May 16th, Mars formed a square with Uranus, and that was on the 16th. And interestingly enough, on May 10th, R&B singer R. Kelly had his songs removed from Spotify after sexual abuse, alleged sexual abuse situations. That was on the 10th. And on May 17th, Michigan actually finalized a lawsuit where $500 million was paid in claims to over 300 survivors of sexual abuse in the largest athletic sexual abuse scandal to date. So this is wrapped around the May 16th square, but interestingly enough, on May 25th, that same week, Harvey Weinstein was arrested after 7 months later after his allegations were made, his allegations of rape and criminal sex charges were made public. So there seems to be an energy around this tied to sexual information or information about sexual abuse coming out into the open. Also on May 18th, just a couple of days after the last Mars, the first Mars-Uranus square, all 34 of Chile's Roman Catholic bishops tendered their resignations to Pope Francis in the wake of the child sex abuse scandal that was occurring in Chile, actually all over, but in Chile it flared there. So this was the first of the current 3 Mars square Uranuses. The second one occurred on August 1st. And it was Justice Kennedy's first day of not being on the Supreme Court. Justice Anthony Kennedy resigned effective July 31st, just 1 day prior to the retrograde Mars squaring Uranus and setting up, I think, what the issues are that we're dealing with now, because Mars makes its third and final square to Uranus today on September 18, and that energy is exploding all over the place. And regardless of what your politics are, it is obvious that this is not situations normal, that energy is brought out into the open, that just exploded, as things tend to do when Mars and Uranus come together. Interestingly enough, there's been a lot of talk about how this is similar to the Anita Hill situation with Clarence Thomas back in 1991. And interestingly enough, we have the Mars-Uranus present then also. And what's interesting about this is that Mars squared Uranus exactly on September 15th, 1991. Now remember, Mars only squares Uranus once a year in the retrograde situation like we're in now. It does it 3 times in a several month period. But normally this is a once a year boom date done. And on September 15th, 1991, Mars squared Uranus, just within 1 week of Clarence Thomas's hearings beginning. They began on the 10th of September, and the day prior to that, on the 9th of September, Michael Tyson, heavyweight boxer Michael Tyson, was indicted for rape charges. So we seem to have this issue of information coming out into the open again and again. However, when Anita Hill testified, that was in October, a month later, and by then Mars was squaring Saturn, not Uranus. And as we know, Uranus is expressive and explosive. Saturn is restraining. It holds the energy in. And interestingly enough, on the 17th, Anita Hill testified on the 16th, and the confirmation hearings occurred. They were reopened on the 16th to get her testimony, and then on the 17th, the Senate confirmed Clarence Thomas. And in a way, you can almost see the results of hot, angry Mars bumping up in a square to cold, restrictive Saturn, Saturn often being represented by the authority and the power structure that exists. And that certainly happened then. We do not have Saturn right now coming into the picture. I'm not making a prediction as to what will happen. I'm just saying that it's a little bit different now without Saturn there, suppressing the energy. And of course, we're in a very different political environment also. One further fact on this is that Roe versus Wade was decided by the Supreme Court on January 22nd, 1973, and that was within 12 hours of Jupiter squaring Uranus. Interesting that Uranus was involved in all of these different sets of dates, and Jupiter is open. Jupiter is expansive. Jupiter is the planet that basically encourages movement outward. And when Jupiter squared Uranus, just 12 hours later, that's when Roe versus Wade was decided and abortion was legalized in the United States. All of this is food for thought, and I think that it's important to understand that these slow-moving planetary configurations don't only impact the mundane global political situations, they impact all of us, and we can all watch out for those things in our lives which need to be expressed. What tensions, what pain, what hurts are being buried, what needs to come out into the open. Remember, Uranus is like lightning. It strikes where it's least expected. Even if you know during a thunderstorm that lightning is going to strike, you don't know when and you don't know where. That's the way Uranus works, and I think it'll be impacting us for days yet to come. Now, as the month continues, the next major event we actually have two major events yet this month. First of all, we do have the equinox, and in the northern hemisphere, that would be the autumnal equinox, the spring equinox in the southern hemisphere, and that is on September 22nd, actually 9:54 p.m. Eastern Time. I think it's interesting that Uranus is still in the mix. Mercury is forming an awkward quincunx with Uranus that day within an hour of the actual equinox. And it's just a sign that we're not done with these unexpected energies. Obviously, that the unexpected energies have been plaguing us all year, but we can look to that September 22nd date as another round, especially as it leads to the full moon on September 24th. This is an interesting full moon because the moon moves into Aries at 7:03 p.m. On the 24th, and it's full just a few hours later at 10:52 p.m. These are all Eastern Daylight Times. The moon is conjuncting Chiron, Chiron retrograding back into Pisces, having visited Aries. We have some remedial healing to do, regardless of what happens in the Supreme Court situation. There's, with the moon conjuncting Chiron, the full moon conjuncting Chiron, and Chiron readying to back into Pisces as it does later in the same day, actually the following day on the 25th. There is a sense that our long-term wounds that don't heal are in the open. We are aware of them, and we are aware of those things which we can heal, and we're aware of those things which we can't heal. The other piece of this is that the full moon opposite the sun is also still very closely quincunx to Uranus, highlighting the fact that the information that's coming out into the open doesn't necessarily easily fit into what we'd like it to fit into. The fact of the matter is that whether we're talking about personal relationships, whether we're talking about job situations, whether we're talking about national or global politics, whether we're talking about sexual allegations at the political level, or whether we're talking about other information that may come out that could in fact be detrimental to anyone in power. He who remains nameless is obviously the person that I'm speaking of, that this could be a very, very important week around the full moon and the days to follow. I also spoke in the monthly update that was done at the beginning of September about the odd septile situation, the 1/7 of a circle, the seven-pointed star that's being formed with Uranus biseptile to Pluto, and the Sun and Mercury coming into the mix. And I'm just reminding us that as the month comes to a close, even though the moon moves into Taurus on September 27th, early in the morning, 3:15 a.m. in New York, that moon will then conjunct Uranus, which is still that explosive energy, squaring Mars. We have this energy of that square between Uranus and Mars, even though it's exact today on the 18th, is still around with us through the end of the month, with the moon dragging us through that energy one more time, while these otherworldly weird septiles are kicking up a storm through the 28th. The month came in with a bunch of direct energy, and it's going out with, I think, as much energy. Pluto turns direct on September 30th. We have a confusing quincunx between Mercury and Neptune the last day of the month, actually on the 30th. And I think that it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks as we move toward October, when Venus turns retrograde and everything changes again. This has been your mid-month update. I'm Rick Levine, and we'll talk to you later.